Hello and welcome back to my channel. On this episode of Unwhitewashed History, we are going to discuss buck breaking. I know that there are going to be people down in my comment section who try to argue and say that this is not historical fact, but there are actual written accounts of it. Historians, predominantly wealthy white men, like to ignore these accounts and pretend like it simply didn't happen because it looks really, really bad. But it's not my job to appease fragile white egos. It is my job to dismantle the system as we know it, and teaching you the actual history of what happened in the Caribbean and here in the United States and Central America is deeply important to undoing the systems of oppression that were created by my ancestors or ancestors. Yeah. And before someone comes in my comment section and wants to be rude, just don't. You will be schooled. Just don't. Look up the facts, look up the history, do your own research, and you will find many of the things that I found. Okay, so buck breaking was a practice that was predominantly used in the Caribbean and in some places here in the United States, where the practice of taking black men who were slaves, and if they were rebellious or a slave master needed to teach a lesson to his slaves, he would gather them up, especially the children and wives of the slave who was being broken, or yeah. And they would all be put out to watch what would go down, and they would often tie the man up and beat him or flog him to the point that he could no longer resist what was about to happen. His body would be tired and exhausted. He would then be stripped naked, and he would be assaulted by a male plantation owner and other men on the plantation. Sometimes there were actually multiple plantation owners that would go around and do this buck breaking. It was a predominant thing within the Caribbean. It also happened here in the United States. A lot of historians that actually acknowledge this fact think that it was a way for some men who were homosexuals to enact their fantasies without it being looked down upon, because if you have sex with a white man, it is considered bad and frowned upon, but if you did that to your slave, no one seemed to care, and it was a very open secret. Like I said, there are many slave accounts from males and females, especially out of the Caribbean, that talk about buck breaking. Often, a lot of these men would either commit suicide or they would run away, but it would instill such fear in the women and children that were forced to watch this. And I'm going to tell you right now, one of the plantation owner's favorite things to do was to put the man's children front and center so that they could see what was happening to their parent. And it would often be so traumatizing to the man. And we're not talking about like, oh, it was one assault and then it was done and over with, which would have been bad within itself. We are talking about systematic gang assault. We're talking about multiple men over a long span of the day that would do this to another human being repeatedly as an effort to terrorize and dehumanize black men, especially black rebellious men. It is, like I said, a well-known fact within the Caribbean. It took place often. I cannot imagine the brutality of this, the cruelty, the unimaginable pain that the person that was being subjected to this must have felt. I have a theory of my own that a lot of this was a power trip and an enjoyment for the men that were taking part in this practice, because they were dominating, humiliating, and dehumanizing a human being, and some people get their rocks off on that. So when they go from plantation to plantation doing this, it's a serial thing. I mean, it was about power and dominance, and it did the job. It instilled fear into the hearts of slaves. Like I said, there are many, many, many accounts of this happening. It was brutal. If you read the accounts, I can't read the accounts on this page, but you can Google them, because if I tried to read this to you, this video would be removed. It was bad. It was bad, and historians like to wash over it because it was so bad and it was so brutal. But again, it is our job to learn the history, to understand what actually happened, and to treat people fairly, and to undo the systems that have been put in place by people who literally did something called buck breaking. Alright, guys, I will see you later.